There are more important things than money. Of course, your family, friends, health, all are held in higher regard than the green stuff. But there is a strange tale from the early days of European settlement in North America that has always had me asking, what would I do for $1 million? It's me. Welcome to my channel. Today we look into the bizarre case of the vanished Roanoke settlers. Want to catch all my episodes early and help support my work? Then you know what to do. In August of 1585, Sir Francis Drake landed in present-day California with 4 ships and about 200 men. The objective? Find gold. Unfortunately for the English, who by this point had been searching for El Dorado for decades, they didn't find any. They did, however, encounter a group of indigenous people whose chief was called Parawana, or possibly Roanoke. According to the Spanish accounts, Drake had previously visited this chief in 1579, when he stayed in the area for several weeks. As the years went by, both England and Spain continued their search for gold along the coast. But it was the English explorer, Sir Humphrey Gilbert, who conceived of an idea that might have made him famous, or very rich, or both. It was to settle the land, not conquer it. By establishing settlements and building towns, he reasoned, then they could start extracting the wealth of the New World and send it back to England. In 1583, Sir Humphrey set sail for North America with 3 ships, one of which was called the Archaeology. He planned to establish a colony in Newfoundland, Canada, but bad weather forced them to head south. They arrived in what is now Nova Scotia, Canada, where they spent a few weeks before heading home. One of the ships, the Archaeology, got separated and wound up wrecked in present-day North Carolina. All on board were killed except 2 men who swam ashore and managed to survive by eating oysters and clams. They eventually made their way back to England by stowing away on a Spanish ship. Sir Humphrey's brother, Sir Walter Raleigh, took note of the location of the lost ship and decided to mount a rescue mission. This was approved by Queen Elizabeth I in 1585. And so the first English colony in North America began. But this wasn't like the Pilgrims arriving at Plymouth Rock. These guys were adventurers. And many had come with the expectation that they'd soon be rich. And so when they found nothing but trees, they were less than thrilled. The settlement didn't last long. Within 2 months, most of the settlers had either starved or died of disease or gone native. Only a handful remained. In January 1586, Sir Francis Drake arrived and took the remaining settlers back to England. And so, the first attempt at the English colony in North America failed, but Raleigh was granted another charter to try again. The second attempt proved no better than the first. Of the 115 settlers who arrived, only 40 remained after a year. They were starving and without hope. Again, Sir Francis Drake came to rescue them. As he reached the shore, he saw the words "help" starve spelled out in large letters. Raleigh would make one last attempt at colonization. This time he brought 150 settlers and supplies and weapons. Many of these settlers were young women who were essentially indentured servants. They were promised land if they would stay for 6 years and bear children who would be loyal subjects of the crown. A plan was devised where the men would hunt and fish, while the women would plant crops and take care of domestic duties. In addition, they were instructed to learn the native languages and customs so they could live in harmony with the natives. And yet, despite having supplies, experienced settlers, and even a governor, John White, to oversee things, the third attempt failed. Within a year, half the population had died. White returned to England to get more supplies, leaving behind his daughter and granddaughter, the only European women at the settlement. When White returned to Roanoke 2 years later, he found the settlement deserted. All the buildings were abandoned. The tools were left lying around, and the place was in good order, as though everyone had simply packed up and left town. The word CROATOAN was carved into a post, and the letters CRO were carved into a tree. No one knows for sure what CROATOAN means, but it was likely the name of a local Native American tribe. It may have been a signal to the English that the settlers had joined the tribe. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle, no evidence of foul play. And since no one was hurt, it seemed likely that the settlers had simply moved somewhere else. But this is where the story takes a bizarre turn. Before he left for England, Governor White had given orders that if anything happened to him, the surviving colonists were to move to a nearby island called Dasamon, also known as Hatteras Island. It was 110 miles away. John White's daughter and granddaughter survived the ordeal and were well traveled by this point. Why would they suddenly decide to move so far away? Also, why would they leave behind everything they had worked so hard to build? There was no logical reason for them to abandon the settlement. As the years went by, various theories popped up to explain what happened. Some said the settlers were victims of a yellow fever epidemic. Others said they were killed by the Native Americans or some mysterious beast. Some believed the settlers joined an already established colony in present-day St. Augustine, Florida. Others believed they headed further south, perhaps to present-day Charleston, South Carolina. But there's one theory that persists to this day. The lost colony is buried beneath the sand. Some believe the entire settlement simply picked up and walked off. following the coast until they died of exposure or starvation or were killed by the elements. Maybe they were never really here at all. Perhaps the whole thing was a mirage. Archaeologists have discovered artifacts from the lost colony, but no definitive proof that the entire settlement ever existed. Author David Stick published a book called The Lost Colony of Roanoke in 1965. In it, he claimed that the settlers had joined a Native American tribe. After doing research in England, he published a second book claiming that Sir Walter Raleigh knew what happened to the colonists, but took the secret with him to his grave. If you think that sounds dramatic, Stick claimed that the Queen knew as well, but she ordered the records destroyed so no one would ever know. According to Stick, the reason the settlers left was because of religious persecution. The Church of England was the state religion in England, and anyone who didn't belong was considered a heretic. If convicted, they could be put to death. To escape the persecution, the settlers fled north and joined the French colony in Canada. Stick cited documents that supposedly contained coded language referring to the fate of the colonists, but no one has ever been able to decipher the codes. So what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Did they simply pack up and leave? Were they killed by the elements, by beasts, or by disease? Were they taken by the Native Americans, or something more sinister? What do you think happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Let me know in the comments below. A less commonly discussed but intriguing hypothesis is that the Roanoke settlers fell victim to Spanish sabotage. During the 1580s, Spain and England were bitter enemies, and the Spanish were well aware of England's colonial ambitions in the New World. Spanish spies had likely informed their commanders of Raleigh's plans, and there were known instances of Spanish ships patrolling the southeastern coast of North America, attempting to locate and destroy English settlements. From the Spanish perspective, the establishment of an English base in Roanoke posed a direct threat to their treasure fleets and regional dominance. Some researchers suggest that a covert Spanish attack could have annihilated the colony, explaining the complete disappearance of the settlers. The lack of documented evidence in Spanish archives, however, weakens this claim. If the Spanish had destroyed the colony, one might expect some record of such a successful operation. Given the strategic importance of their efforts to halt English expansion, the silence in both Spanish and English historical records makes this theory intriguing but ultimately speculative. It remains a fascinating example of how international politics and imperial rivalries may have contributed, directly or indirectly, to the fate of the lost colony. More than 4 centuries have passed since the settlers of Roanoke vanished, and yet the mystery remains fresh, like footprints on a beach washed over by time. We have combed through the sands of history, scrutinized maps and artifacts, and listened to the echoes of oral traditions and written reports. We have debated theories that range from pragmatic to fantastical, all in search of an answer that continues to elude us. But perhaps the greatest legacy of the lost colony is not in its disappearance, but in the questions it left behind. Who were these people? What did they endure? And what can we learn from their fate? In seeking the truth of Roanoke, we are reminded that history is not always a series of neat conclusions. Sometimes it is a mosaic of uncertainty, a puzzle where some pieces will forever be missing. And that, perhaps, is why the story of the lost colony still grips us after all these years. It is not simply about what was lost, but about what we are still searching to find. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most enduring mysteries, don't forget to subscribe to History, Facts, and Mysteries for more stories that challenge the boundaries of what we think we know. Because the past, like Roanoke, is never truly gone. It's just waiting to be discovered again.